Just a little bit about me. Been training with Ring Zero now for a couple of years, mainly focus in a couple of different malware analysis courses, more of a beginner intermediate course, which will be offered here coming up in February, and then a more advanced course, which will be likely offered later in the year. Outside of that, I'm a professor at Dakota State University. It's in the middle of South Dakota, so I actually come to you from South Dakota. Which is somewhere between Minneapolis and Omaha, bigger cities if you're familiar with the U.S. layout. I've been teaching there for about 8 years. Focus is in cybersecurity. We have a couple of PhD programs there, malware analysis, threat research, reverse engineering, such topics. I've been with Bromium for a few years. Recently I shouldn't say recently, about a year or two now it's been, was acquired by Hewlett Packard and do threat research with them. So I've been with Bromium HP now for, probably 4 or 5 years as well. I do some work with the Open Information Security Foundation, the OISF, which is the foundation, the nonprofit that supports the Suricata project, Suricata being a network monitoring and security tool. So you'll see a little bit of that today, and I'm happy to talk about that in any detail. Getting out of the military, spent 20 years doing that, so I can finally retire, which is why I have a beard, because I haven't been able to go more than a month without shaving for 20 years. And so now it's time to get a ponytail and grow a beard. Tell what my family says that it looks atrocious, and then I shave it all and go back to the way I looked for the previous 20. I did cyber though for the military, the last probably 5 years of my career, and before that was an intel officer. And before that, did some other things. I author on Pluralsight, and I love sharing knowledge and providing, getting into opportunities where I can present different topics. And so I jump on to pretty much any and all conferences and workshop opportunities that I can. Fairly active on social media, so please feel free. I put my email in the chat there, but if there's anything I can do to help that's within my ability and my power, my time, I will certainly try and do that. So you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn are probably the two platforms that I'm the most active on. Right now, nothing else exists except maybe a little bit of YouTube. So today, we've got about 2 hours. I figure we'll talk here for about 45 minutes and then take just a quick nature break, get something to refresh ourselves and let our eyes get a break. Move into the last half of the session. And then I'm happy to stick around to answer any questions or have any further discussion. Yes, I have a few slides to start things off, but I'm not going to stay in the slides. We're going to go and get into the VM that I'm going to be using. It's just Remnix, latest Remnix, but I've added a couple of tools. So if there's anything that you would like instructions on how to add, I'm happy to do that. If you just would like the VM, I'm happy to zip that up into an OVA and drop that into a file share and paste that link anywhere here in the chat so that you can grab that. So that'll be the game plan. I want to try to do some things, quote unquote live. And I've already had some problems, and that even as live as I want things to be, I don't want to run into dead ends and roadblocks. And so I was looking at finding some new content last night, and some of that's been taken down already today. So I have some different strategies to handle that, but we're going to try to find some things live today and just really go through the full process of that I take for discovering and sort of triaging, identifying these interesting things, these unknown threats, and some of the toolkits and other things that come along with discovering content out there. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat, use the QA. I'll keep an eye on that and try to answer those, at least the ones that are relevant here as we go. So to get started, anybody that is dealing with security for organization, for themselves, for even friends and family, that malware is a very broad topic. It's very hard to really define. I mean, we can say malware is malicious software, but it comes in so many different forms. It attacks our users in so many different ways. As an analyst, as a threat researcher or a malware analyst, there are just a lot of different technologies that we have to be able to deal with. Now, this slide maybe is a little bit old in terms of the actual icons that I'm using. I don't run into a lot of Java-based malware. Certainly, Flash is all but dead. You still see it out there from time to time, believe it or not. Exploit kits were the ones that really weaponized Flash. And that got sunsetted, a couple of years ago after a lengthy retirement. PDFs, maybe not so much anymore. But the diversity is there, and you can go from, in a single investigation, a single incident, an office document that maybe uses, a little bit of living off the land to execute some shell code, to drop a payload, and now lateral movement. And so you might be analyzing macros to having to disassemble and decompile something with IDAPRO or Ghidra. And so, in any single incident, the breadth of technology can be quite broad. Common attack scenarios, again, anybody that is really dealing with, what do I mean by living off the land? So what I mean by living off the land, here's a good example. So some common attack scenarios, email-based delivery with attachments is a pretty popular technique right now. That is threat actors like Emotet. Emotet's back, kind of to my surprise, maybe to a handful of others. Emotet's back. They seem like they're back up and running like nothing happened except a nice long holiday, maybe a little bit of prison time. Who knows exactly what happened there? But they weaponize these office documents. So Word and Excel are going to be your two primary. PowerPoint can be abused, but it's far less common. They can get attached to an email, sent to users, sent to organizations, sent to wherever they want to target someone. The user, if it gets through, maybe a few layers of defenses, the user will open that attachment. They have to enable some content, and they'll get macros to execute. Well, these are kind of living off the land, and that the whole attack scenario is based upon the assumption that the user will have Office installed, that they'll be able to enable macros and get those macros to execute. Because that is a normal part of using Office documents, that's a pretty good assumption. Organizations, as we've seen, are challenged with blocking these Office docs because a lot of times they have legitimate use cases for these Office docs and the macros that they contain. Now, those macros, you'll see a lot of times will then transition to maybe what I would say is a more clearer use of living off the land. And that is now they might execute a PowerShell script. So the macros might generate a PowerShell script and then execute that in memory. And again, the assumption is that the host, the victim, will have PowerShell. It'll be installed. It'll be available in the operating system. It won't be blocked or disabled by the administrators. And so they don't need to bring in another tool to execute this payload. They can just abuse and utilize what's already there. In this case, the PowerShell. PowerShell isn't the only one. There can be JavaScript attachments. There can be VB script. There can be any number of different sort of artifacts at this next stage as this attack begins to unravel. Most of it up to this point is just trying to go and download the next stage. As you'll see, things work very much in different stages, which from a research perspective can be very interesting because that gives us opportunity then to go out and identify different data, different indicators, different artifacts, different tools at these different stages. Eventually, though, these will lead to the download of the actual malware. Right? So maybe a weaponized Emotet doc that runs some macros to execute some PowerShell that goes out to a host to download the Emotet Trojan. And now we're dealing with post-infection activity. The Trojan itself is on the system. It's likely going to be where you see persistence. It's likely going to be a native code format, so a PE file, maybe a .NET binary. It can do a lot at this point, right? Persistence is one, lateral movement is another, initial host discovery and sort of figuring out what's in the environment, additional tools, additional malware, right? There's any number of things that can happen. But this is sort of the flow. Post-infection, we tend to see maybe a change. You certainly see that with Emotet, and that the delivery might come from more compromised infrastructure. But now post-infection, we're into a different C2, a command and control network. That's not the only attack scenario. Of course, with the pandemic that we've all been living through the last couple of years, there's definitely been a transition as a lot of organizations wanted to enable their employees to work from home. So many organizations was a struggle and doing things improperly, like exposing services that should not be exposed directly to the internet. For example, 3389 or port 3389, which is the default port for remote desktop services for Microsoft Windows. You can see that the screenshot on the left and the right here with the numbers, these are scan results from Shodan, show about the same amount of hosts, but there's 4.9, just shy of 4.9 million hosts out there that have RDP exposed to the internet, which can certainly lead to problems for that organization. So threat actors can scan. Of course, the internet gets scanned all day long. If they find if they find these vulnerable services and they know how to either identify misconfigurations or maybe do some credential stuffing, brute forcing, maybe they've stolen some credentials from a previous phishing attack. Maybe there's just a known vulnerability and they can exploit that in order to gain access to that system. That can be another, slightly more, I don't know, proactive is the right word, but a bit more proactive, I suppose, to get access. MITRE ATT&CK is a great way to try to sort of lay this out. MITRE ATT&CK, MITRE DEFEND, a couple of different frameworks that are out there that give us some perspective on how adversaries operate and allow us then to more, take a more methodical approach to the different phases, the different tools and techniques, where we can collect data, what sort of artifacts, what sort of tools malware authors use. We tend to focus on the left. In my estimation, that's the noisiest spot. We have the emails, we have all of the, thinking back just a couple slides to that diagram, we have that kind of initial flurry of activity to get the malware into the environment, to get it on the system, maybe before things from the adversary perspective start to settle down. So lots of opportunity here. And again, this kind of highlights what a complex area that we're dealing with. So what are we dealing with? I think that's a fair question and something that I constantly am asking myself, because the nature of how we are, you often hear the discussion of defense and offense as this back and forth, this cat and mouse, and it very much is. Adversaries find new ways to get past defenses. They find new ways to attack users, attack organizations. Ransomware started off, and ransomware's been around for a long time. But it really got commoditized here in the last few years, and then that evolved so that there was, a data theft from the environment, and then the ransom. So that way, if the organization decided, no, we'll just roll to our backups, then the adversary could say, well, we've got all your data, and we're gonna expose that, dox you to the public internet if you don't pay up. And so they change and they evolve, which means that organizations have to constantly change and evolve. Part of that is just understanding what's out there. And I will be taking and using a lot of data from the URL house, from abuse.ch. If you're not using that as a resource, either to consume data from it or hopefully to contribute to it as well, please consider doing that. It is a great resource, and it's really become for me sort of the center point of all of the research that I do. You can see the URL on the bottom of the slide here. urlhouse.abuse.ch/statistics. They have some statistics that are available that we can look at. One of those is the malware, the URLs that are delivered. As the name implies, the URL house. The main purpose is to collect URLs that are known to be distributing malware, and those URLs then, what the URLs will do is try to identify what malware family, amongst other things. One of the primary, though, is what type of malware is that URL distributing. So this was pulled back in July 2021, I think before the last Spring Zero event, Samil. You can see Hyodo or Emotet was at the top. And then we had Quackbot, TrickBot, Dridex, and a few others. This is helpful because it helps to understand, at least from my perspective, where should I focus? What families should I understand better, how they operate, so that I can identify their different signatures. How do they operate in the network? How do they utilize the network to download payloads or to command and control? How do they infect the host? What type of obfuscation do they use? For example, they tend to have a very predictable pattern, at least in phases, in how they obfuscate macros. And so then you can understand that. You can kind of identify that family if signatures fail, or maybe there's some new anti-analysis in it, so you don't get a full capture of network activity. You might be able to recognize the pattern within the obfuscation itself. Tags are also something. So I would suspect that they are supplying a number of YARA rules and other things to the different tags, as well as just recognizing raw binary content type. Again, you can see here from last July, some of the most popular tags, ELF, executable linking formats. So the PE, the PE format equivalent for Linux, so binary file format. Might be a surprise, but when you think about it, and if you look at the URLs, you'll see a lot of it's for botnet stuff, botnet activity, a lot of those IoT devices that are running, some flavor of Linux. It would make sense then that those are seen quite prevalently. Can you get the recording? So question just came in. Yes, the recording will be made available and will be sent out, I believe, to the email that you registered here later this year or very early next year. A little LOL bin attacks. Yes. For the living off the land techniques, there's actually a lot of good resources out there. There's a project that I think tries to categorize as many different techniques and different binaries that can be used to achieve things like downloading content or executing arbitrary commands. I can't think of the URL off the top of my head, but I know if you do a search for LOL bin, you'll be able to find that. Okay. And then there's information like the ASNs. So again, lots of great stuff there at the URL house. I pulled these just this morning, and you'll see, oddly enough, not much has changed. So it's good to check. Sometimes you'll find significant changes. Sometimes you won't. Of course, this data is only as good as what's contributed to it. And so some of these platforms, as you'll see, they can be skewed. They can be altered. They might not have the most information submitted to them. It just all depends. Same with vendors, right? They're going to have certain ways in which they're collecting data, and it might be based off of the telemetry from the AV that they sell and install in customers. Well, what if most of their customers are in a certain geographic part of the world? Well, that could limit then the type of data that they're actually seeing. Thank you. So somebody shared that. I'm going to move the LOL bins URL here into the general chat. Oh, looks like somebody beat me to that. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. And then places, sandboxes, probably some of the bigger sandboxes out there. AnyRun certainly has emerged as a go-to, Triage, Joe Sandbox. There's a public instance of Cape. And a lot of these, again, will provide insight into the threats that they're tracking, keeping in mind that their data is only as good as what people are submitting to them. So here you can see Redline, Emotet, Formbook. Again, this came from AnyRun just this morning, so it's relatively recent. A lot of talk about 0-day. Of course, I'm competing. I guess it sounds like I'm competing with a pretty bad one right now with the Log4j. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure how to think about it, but I didn't have to spend my weekend dealing with it, just passively observing it on Twitter and other social media. But when it comes to the delivery of malware, in this case, it's going to be abused, right? With the ability to exploit systems and gain a foothold. When it comes to the previous kind of concept of operations that I talked about, particularly with Office documents, while there certainly is exploitation that can happen, a lot of times the Office documents are just normal Office documents. I mean, normal in the sense that the way that they're weaponized is to use macros and all of just the features that are available within the operating system within the Office suite. So there's no reliance on memory corruption to get code execution. Probably one of the bigger ones, at least one that is still abused to this day, is the CVE 2017-11-882, and that was the equation editor in which I believe it was a buffer overflow that was allowed to occur to get a code execution and then kind of arbitrary stuff from there, some shell code to download the next stage. With the standard Office suite, we need to have a little bit of user interaction, hence more reliance on social engineering. With some of these CVEs, then it's enough just to get the user to open the document, which is, of course, a more desirable state by anybody who wants to get code to execute on someone's host. If an email gets through, this is what I was talking about with a little bit of that enable content, a little bit of that social engineering. If macros are not disabled, the default state is to block, but allow the user to enable content. And so again, we kind of have this default state of still allowing the user to do the wrong thing. And somehow we still blame the user. I guess that's a topic and discussion for another time. But if they enable content, and oftentimes the social engineering that we see in these documents can be very convincing. They enable content, the macros execute, and that's when the chain of bad stuff starts to happen. Lots of ways to abuse Office documents. Excel 4 macros. We'll talk just very briefly about those. Linking to external content, template injection. There's a lot of ways to abuse documents. Oftentimes, it still requires users to interact somehow. As you can see with this screenshot, this external content that was linked to it was to basically run some PowerShell, download a file and execute it. The user still had to update that external content. And so oftentimes there's still something that the user has to do in order to interact with that. But there's many different ways. And so if we condition our users to avoid the enable content, but then they don't recognize that when they see this update external content link, this different dialogue, that's still a problem, it might be a way to get sort of past their training. We can't forget about phishing sites. We'll talk about phishing sites here in just a little bit. They can be very convincing because someone can make a complete copy and add some functionality to it in order to look exactly like the real thing. The code is out there. It's all client side, so it's very easy to make copies. And maybe not quite as easy to turn it into something that's functional, but anybody with a little bit of programming skills is able to do that. These can be a little bit easier to get into, to the user to get past the organization's defenses, because there's not an attachment or a file that can get scanned or quarantined or put in some sort of an analysis queue waiting for release after it's been through a sandbox or something. These can just be a link that then the user initiates by clicking on that and going out to the internet. Again, lots of stuff we can talk about here. I just kind of trying to set the stage in a way that's a little bit broad. Of course, if we had 2 or 3 or 4 days of training together, we'd get into all the nitty gritty. Some of the big tells, typically these things are going to be not on legitimate domains, right? Trying to authenticate to my Office 365 on a .ro website is definitely something that's suspicious. There's then on top of that a lack of a secure session, which could be another indicator in the browser that something's not quite right to our user. Seeing Microsoft login pages with .php files, as someone who's a little more technically astute in what they're observing, they can see those patterns. And these can become good patterns too when we're trying to do some threat hunting, looking through, like historically back through our traffic to see if we've had maybe any interesting patterns in where our users are going, if we can see that anyway. So what happens next? Okay, well, again, everything kind of operates in stages. Here we have a document that at the time, I believe these were dry decks, were abusing the brands, the global sign, and the QuickBooks in order to add that legitimacy to them, to give instructions to the user to get them to enable content. To the right, we have the processes. So Excel launching MSHTA, which then launches a web query.exe. Very suspicious pattern. Excel launching MSHTA is a suspicious pattern, and only kind of further gets more suspicious from there. We have on the network then. So I guess to back up 1 second though on that process, we can see information about where these artifacts resolve. And the MSHTA, we have a .sct file in C program data, which then launches Q web query from that same directory. And so these become valuable indicators in order to understand where on the host these artifacts might exist, so that if we need to go and look through, scan our systems on a network, then these are places that we can point. If we have the ability to gather this information anyway, we can point those tools to tell us, this is file here, is this directory here, is this SCT file here. On the network, we also have some interesting requests, probably many things as you're looking at that you can recognize. The first handful of things that come to my mind, it's not over a secure connection, so we just have an HTTP request. We have web services Amazon, so we certainly have a typo squat to make it look like it's a legitimate Amazon thing. A non-standard port 8088. So, okay, that's something that kind of stands out. Maybe you have services in your environment that are supposed to be communicating on non-standard ports, but if not, that might be something that's worth investigating. We also have a request for file 7.bin out of a /CSS folder, right? And again, when you look at web frameworks and when web developer methodologies, it would be very unconventional to put any sort of binary content, especially an executable file, into a CSS folder, because CSS, your cascading style sheets, that's more of your files for on the client side to tell the browser how to make things look pretty, to add colors and font families and design your layout. So lots of interesting things here. Here's some example results from Triage. Triage is a great sandbox. It's from at least some of the folks that made the original Cuckoo project and are helping support with some of the CAPE efforts. They do great things like you see with a lot of modern sandboxes, good signature detections and tags. So here we can see that if we just would have taken this sample, uploaded it to Triage, within a few minutes, we would have had a DryDex tag. So that tells us almost immediately what we've got to what we're dealing with. So sandboxes are a big part of that triaging. You know, what I kind of consider my array of easy options, right? They come with challenges, right? Triage and AnyRun and those, they offer you a free service, but in exchange for that freeness, when you upload a sample, it's publicly available. If you want to upload samples to be private, then you have to pay to use the service. And so, you know, if that becomes an issue, which it can, you know, certainly if you have someone attacking the organization, you might not want to upload something to a public threat platform because there's something unique to your environment that's inside the tools or what they use to attack you. Maybe you're not sure, so you just don't want it out there. Maybe you don't want them to know that you're investigating. And there's a number of reasons. And so, again, they come with a trade-off. But, you know, I'm not defending an organization. If I find interesting samples, it's because I'm finding something out there. And my whole goal is to help share. So platforms like this work great. And they're, again, a big part of that first step of what can I do that's pretty easy to help me identify what I'm dealing with. And Triage and AnyRun and sandboxes are definitely one of those first steps. What about the SCT file? So don't forget about these different artifacts. Just uploading this into a sandbox, and these are all screenshots from Triage, we may only get this one DNS request, one query, one HTTP request to web services amazon.com. But if we were to extract that SCT file, we find that SCT file, I'm not even sure that's a valid extension, right? It was a VB script file. You'll see there's this whole array of domains that it's likely reaching out to. And this is very common to see this pattern, you know, early in this attack lifecycle, and that in order to add sort of the persistence, almost to increase the odds that they'll be successful, they have an array, a collection of hosts that they try to reach out to. So here we see not only do we have web services Amazon as our first, but then there is onlinefastsolutions.com and paymentadvisory.com and any number of these. So this gives us additional insight, right? The sandbox may not show it because this is designed to, once it makes a connection to one host, stop. It's got the payload. It's going to move on. Of course, we can tweak the sandbox to say don't allow the HTTP request to go out. That way, you force it to maybe go through all of the domains that it's got hard coded into these additional files. But again, lots of things can happen. Lots of different ways that malware authors can complicate our analysis. So not only now do we have a bunch of additional domains, we could download whatever content's there if we wanted to. We could see if it's the same file. If it's not the same file, then we could do some analysis on that, try to identify it. Likely it's all the same family, but that's not going to always be a guarantee. They might be dropping different malware families. You'll notice patterns, right? Every one of these is at port 8088. So that's a good pattern that now if we had a way to look back in our network traffic, and all of these are non-HTTPS, by the way, as well. So we have the full application layer. If we're doing, network traffic capture, we have the full application layer transactions. We can look at all the HTTP content. We can see, and even if we didn't, we might still be able to look at the port, right? Even a TLS session, we see the port that it connects to. So if these were all HTTPS, but they were going to say 8443 instead of just 443, that could still be a strong indicator that would allow us to go back through our traffic and take a look at maybe identifying additional hosts or additional so hosts that is connecting to or hosts in our network that may have been part of this attack. These artifacts are usually quite straightforward. So here it's just going to loop through each domain, create a few objects. wscript.shell is one that allows, basically, it's like an object that represents the command prompt. And it's just going to try to reach out, grab that payload, write it to the file system. A lot of times you'll see that in places like, the temp folder, and then execute it. And that's all that's trying to do there. If we were doing more of this maldoc analysis, there is a number of people that are doing this. But of course, the next step is automating this. So I have a lab kind of based around this where we'd go through and write some Python to open up these documents and get this content and then extract all these domains and do some further analysis. And that'd really be the next steps. But for right now, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that it's there. The content can be there. So it is helpful at times to be able to do a little malware analysis, to be able to jump in and actually put eyes on some of these artifacts instead of just relying on the results in a sandbox. Again, back into Triage, they're probably the best at doing configuration extraction. So a lot of the different malware families, when we get to the payloads themselves, the executables, they're going to have configuration files like software tends to have. In the case of Dridex, you'll have information extracted like the botnet and the C2 domains. So you might not see when it's infected a system or in a sandbox, you might not see it beaconing out to any of its C2. Maybe there's some anti-analysis, or maybe it's just going to connect to one of the C2 nodes, although it has 2 or 3 hard-coded for resiliency. And if someone takes the time to understand where that information is located, that they can extract that, then you can get it presented to you. So, from our perspective, we take this Trojan, this malware, webquery.exe, and we put it into Triage, and now we've got additional C2 information. So it can be really, really helpful and really expedite the process. Not only that, but if I get config extraction for Dridex from an unknown executable, I'm even more confident that that's actually Dridex. If I just have a tag, I'm pretty confident, but sometimes the tags are incorrect. And so maybe I'm pretty confident, but not all the way. I get configs extracted. Now I'm quite a bit more confident that this is in fact the type of malware that I'm dealing with. As a brief aside, one project that started with some work and colleagues at HP, and I've been doing a little bit with on my own, is using the images to do a bit of similarity analysis. So taking the Office documents, and this work has been done. What was sort of the inspiration for this was with ransomware notes, seeing the images that often get left with a ransomware incident as a way to identify the different ransomware families if it wasn't obvious through the note, through the extortion letter. So here, taking Office documents, extracting the image, and then using an image similarity technique to group or cluster them together. And what this can help with is identifying malware families. So you can see in this screenshot, in the main screenshot anyway, there's a couple of graphs. And what might happen is you get a graph of 50 different emails. If only 1 or 2 of them have signatures, right? They were able to identify maybe through the URL house that was dropping Emotet or that was dropping TrickBot or whatever. The other ones are unknown. If I cluster them into a group, I have a higher confidence that those documents were also part of probably that same campaign. Again, not a guarantee. It's not a hard and fast. It's not always going to be right, but it is something that is interesting to look at. This is from just this morning. So this is from Office docs that were submitted to the URL house, Malware Bazaar. So the Malware Bazaar is a newer project from the URL house or from abuse.ch. It's meant to be a place to share samples. And so it's just a good place to go. And they've got an API that we can grab information from. So you can see here, this was from this morning. I generated it this morning, but this is from all of the Office documents from last week. So whatever week we're in the year, 50 or so. You can see some pretty good clustering. Most of these larger graphs now are from Emotet docs. There's a handful that just didn't cluster, so a lot of individual groups. There's a threshold that you can play around with. I can play around with how close of a similarity is in the image. And again, the approach is very it's designed around doing image analysis. It's not like a fuzzy hash like SSDeep. It is meant to look at the images themselves. Some of them you can look at, such as this one, and I can visually see, well, those look pretty close. I wonder why they didn't get a similarity. And there might be something within the image itself. So there's pixel busting techniques and other techniques to try to have an image to just the user to look look the same, but the structure, the pixel makeup is a little bit different. What's the link? So let's see here. What desktop am I on? I'll post that in the chat. It's almost as if I anticipated that. So you can check that out. I'm in the process. The URL house has made some changes to the to their domain or API structure and stuff. So I think a few things are a little broken. Just figured that out this morning. So I'm in the process of fixing that. I'll probably get that updated later today or tomorrow. But here you can check out the project. Again, this was some original work that a colleague had started at HP. And I actually went to look for the original project on our HP repo, but it's not there anymore. So I'm not sure where he moved that. But just want to make sure that he's definitely given the credit. You'll see his authorship information inside of the Python scripts as well. Question about good guides for how to get started tracking malware families. I'm going to try to talk about that throughout the session here and just the techniques that I use. Now, I don't necessarily track them on a daily basis as someone who's doing that as a full-time job. But generally, you pick up patterns and observations, even as a hobbyist or an enthusiast, which then you could certainly grow the techniques into more and more formal as it's something that you're doing on a daily basis. The image similarity is just one way. There isn't really a mainstream way of doing it. We did work out a plugin for Cuckoo in order to generate image similarity. We actually have a way of generating signatures. We just haven't gotten those in a easy to consume public manner yet. So maybe this would be inspiration to do that. But there's a lot of other techniques, and I'll try to talk about those here as we go. So I'll leave the question open. And if I don't answer that by the end of the session, let me know, and we can we can either try to get a better answer by the end, or we can continue the conversation via email or something. Okay, so I shared that. Okay, again, we're a lot of stuff we could talk about. No, I don't have the Cuckoo plugin. My colleague is the one that created that, and he hasn't released it yet. So this is a good reminder that I need to bug him about that, because he put the work into it. I don't know why we haven't released it. Unfortunately, it looks like Cuckoo, it hasn't been maintained for a while. I still use it because it's what I set up originally, but the project's been archived, and all of the developments moved on to Cape, the configuration and payload extraction, so forks from Cuckoo, Cape and Cape v2. So definitely check those out. I haven't looked extensively at the code base myself, but I imagine there's quite a bit of similarity in terms of the sort of the inherent framework. Okay, so lots of stuff we could talk about here. Again, I want to get into more of the content discovery. But Excel4 macros were something that became a bit more mainstreamed here in early 2020, kind of as the pandemic kicked off. Just a different way of getting content to execute in an Excel document. So we have VBA macros, Visual Basic for Application, which is sort of the modern way of writing macro content and storing them in the documents. And then this Excel4 method has been around since, from what I can gather, the late 90s at least. It's been deprecated, but as Microsoft likes to do, they keep it in the Office suite. And then it's enabled by default on top of that. I think they just somewhat recently announced that they're going to disable those by default, which is, of course, a good move. But they're old, and they changed. The structure in which the content is stored is a little bit different. It's all in the cells of the workbooks and different sheets. And it's just a kind of you can put executable content in the cells, and then it just starts to execute them. What I find interesting with these Excel4 macros, and why I'm bringing them up here, is that you'll find a lot more anti-analysis in them. So with the VBA style, there usually isn't a lot, at least not that I've experienced in the handful of years now that I've been looking at them. But with the Excel4 macro, there is a lot more. And I'm not really sure why that would change, because you can do the anti-analysis in the others, but it's there. And so with a lot of these Excel4 docs, you'll see that there is more of a basic thing. right? Is this a Windows platform? What is the screen resolution? Is there a mouse available? Does the system have the ability to play audio? Things that a normal user system would probably possess, capabilities or features. And if it doesn't pass any of those, then of course it's not going to do anything. It's not going to try to reach out to download the next stage, which means that the documents might look like they're not malicious. They might look benign, or we don't get the intel that we want out of them. And so then we have to use tools like the XLM deobfuscator in order to try to unravel those. If you are interested in taking a look at some of a bit more of the malware analysis, I have a handful of exercises here. I'll paste this in the chat as well. So a handful of exercises I've been trying. I set out the year trying to do one a month. As you can see, I did a terrible job of that. But I'm going to be contributing to them at least somewhat regularly. But here is an Excel 4 macro exercise, and you'll have a couple of documents. You can also see that there is a full solution. So this is a lot like the labs that I create for any training, and that there is not only the exercise and all of the necessary artifacts, but then there's these full walkthrough sort of narrative tutorials to take home, because I think that's a big part of training. I've been through enough training, especially when you're doing, even this 2 full hours is a lot. It's a lot to remember. You may have a recording, but that's not always the case. And now if you take an 8-hour training or a 16-hour or 32 hours, right, it's a lot. It's a lot to remember, even if you have the recordings. And so I like these labs because I think they're a great way, in my mind anyway, to go back through and still get all of the core learning without having to remember all of the details. So you'll see here screenshots and commands and all the stuff to do the analysis. If you don't want to just jump into the solution, you can, of course, try to just answer the questions that are posed here, the analysis questions. And all of these are on Cyber Defenders too. So if you want to check out the challenge in more of a CTF fashion, they're also there. So challenges based off of what you're seeing here. Oh, I didn't want to close that. So anyways, since we're not going to get into all the gory details of how to do these with all of these documents, just because we won't have time, but those exercises help you. And again, these are things that we would explore if we did have more time. Here's an example, limited activity. So bottom screenshot, process activity, Excel. Upper screenshot, network activity, no DNS requests, no connections, no HTTP requests. Threats are IDS alerts, nothing, right? It looks benign, but to a more astute observer, you say, oh, this probably did some sort of anti-analysis, probably. And you mix in the prevalence of the Excel 4 macros and the use of Excel here, it's likely the case. Question is, in terms of solutions, are there any with manual analysis without fully dump automated tools? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking. When it comes to digging into the documents themselves, I'm going to go back in the slides here to right here. There's a lot of like the sandboxes that are going to apply signatures and YAR rules and maybe some kind of behavioral things, looking for different behavioral patterns to try to give you more of a heads up, more of a summary of what the samples are doing. A lot of times, though, when it comes to just really figuring out what's going on, let's say you have, as the example here, we come across a document and it does nothing. We have to figure out what the anti-analysis is. I can think of some ways. Let's just get to the point where you can see. So here's the code. I can think of some ways to try to automate that, but it's actually quite challenging because you need a tool like, in this case, the XLM deobfuscator was developed as a response to this, and it goes through and it tries to emulate all of this content and break it down into something that's at least more on par with legitimate code. If you don't, you have something like you see here. This is the sort of obfuscation that you tend to see with interpreted languages, with the content that is, kind of left on that MITRE attack. And that's just grueling. It's hard to look at. It's hard to trace manually. And so tools like XLM Deobfuscator, they can help turn that into something that's a little bit more like this. Now, this code here was just actually how it was written in the document. But that's the whole goal behind it. In fact, I probably have some output. Oh, I don't. Right here. So this is a screenshot of that content after it's been emulated. So it took something that was really broken up and just all over the spreadsheet in terms of the content, the executable code that they wanted, and made it much more legible to the point where we can see, it's going to use run DLL32. This is the path that it's going to look for the DLL. And above that, we have the request to 0b.htb/s.dll. So now we know where it's downloading that from. You could probably combine. I could see maybe combining tools like, let's go back to here. Sorry for all the jumping around on these slides. I could see maybe, combining some Yara type rules or something to identify these get.workspace. These are what's used for the anti-analysis. So this is workspace object or method that allows them to then look at all the different aspects of the environment. So workspace 14 is, I'd have to look it up, but maybe it's probably the resolution, right? If it's greater than 390, looks like that's probably a resolution thing. Where then you could maybe apply some, after you extracted this with XLM, you could then apply some Yara or something to know what type of anti-analysis is there. But there's just sort of this weird, oftentimes you got to, I guess I find myself just having to dig into the documents themselves to figure out what's going on when they don't just work. The anti-analysis, we don't have time to get into too much of it, but it's a big part of it. And it can be very simple things that cause, just really force you to get in there and do that manual work. The obfuscation, such as this, this can be, it's a simple technique in its own way, but it can be so convoluted that it just is really hard actually to unravel. So it's a combination. I find everything that I do, you learn basic static and basic dynamic and advanced static and advanced, it's really a hybrid approach, right? You pick and choose the tools and you build automations as you gain experience and time and need. Okay, so hopefully that helped. If not, let me know. Okay, so I'm going to move on to looking at what we're here for, and that is to talk more about finding content. So set the stage for that. We'll take just a quick 5 minutes, and then we'll move into the last half of the session. Just like the VM, if there's any of the slides or anything that you would like, please let me know. I'll get those uploaded here before we wrap up. So let's move over to infrastructure. Okay, so URL House, again, great resource. I use that it's really the centerpiece for a lot of my analysis. If I find something, is it on the URL House? If so, it's probably got a tag or a signature. If it's not, then it's probably unique and I get to report it, and that's kind of exciting. A lot of infrastructure that's out there is really, it's abused it's someone else's. So here's an example. This basically comes from the URL House API. So you can look that up. Simple curl request right now, tag of Dridex. So, if a URL has a tag, this allows us then to filter on URLs that match that tag. I'm going to just pipe that through JQ. JQ is a command line utility in order to work with JSON. So response will come back in JSON, as a lot of APIs provide. And I'm just going to query to just get the URL because the results will contain a lot of information. I just want the URL. And then the last thing that I'll do, because of the way that just some of the quirkiness of how we wrote subcrawl, which I'll introduce in just a minute, I didn't account for double quotes around those values. So I'm just using sed to parse those and then write the results. And here you can see now these results are a little old. These are from earlier this year, but you'll notice that a lot of the host A lot of these are legitimate hosts. Some of them, a good portion of them, are WordPress sites. I'm not condemning WordPress. It's just simply an observation. But a lot of them are somebody else's sites. And so they're compromised in some way, shape, or form, and then utilized to deliver this malware. We'll pull some URLs here in a minute. You'll see, if you've been observing some of the patterns lately, you've seen that there's been a pretty significant shift, particularly with Dridex, or the folks behind delivering Dridex, that they're using CDNs, a lot of Discord app and OneDrive links, which means that it's still somebody else's infrastructure, but because it's on the cdn.discordapp.com, it's a little more challenging to find other interesting content around it. And I'll try to explain why here as we go. Question about the removal of the content. Yeah, I mean, I typically, if I report something, I don't typically do that. I supply it to the URL house, because then the URL house handles the, I believe they handle all the requests to take down or get it onto block lists. So I'm not entirely sure all of the process there once someone complains about a URL hosting or a host hosting bad content. Definitely, it seems like it takes a while for those hosting providers, if they respond at all, to take those down. And you'll find information about the status of that in the URL house if you look at the individual record data. So I became really interested with open directories about 1.5 years ago as a way to try to discover new content. Even though I'm a contractor with HP, I don't have access to a lot of the internal data. And so I'm looking at it as more of a, almost like a hobbyist, right? I have public feeds like the URL house and stuff that everybody, other researchers are already looking at. I've already reported and I've already investigated. So how can I use that information to find something else, to find even more interesting things? And that's where open directories became something I was fascinated in, because an open directory, just simply being a web server that allows you to, instead of rendering a page, it renders the listings of the content in that directory. Then it allows you to see everything that's there, as well as the opportunity to potentially traverse the file system. And from that, I started finding things like C2 panels and builders and source code and phishing kits, and just all of the things that have to have a web presence, that if the threat actor's OPSEC is not up to snuff, they might leave things behind. So subcrawl was written. I eventually convinced a colleague at HP, Patrick, to help me with it, and he took on a big chunk of the coding. We worked on that a good chunk of earlier this year, and then finally got to a point where like kind of late this summer, we had something stable enough that we were comfortable enough with sharing. So you can find that on the GitHub, on our GitHub. We'll see it here in just a minute. The idea behind it is I wanted to find a way to automate discovery of content through open directories, as well as then collecting it, categorizing it, organizing it. And so that's the whole purpose behind subcrawl. Again, it works off of, and is really right now, you have to have an open directory. We don't do any brute forcing, although we've considered that. And we don't just generally do any scraping. It's all content that is discovered through open directories. So we feed it a list of URLs, maybe from the URL house, maybe from wherever you can get them. And it takes those URLs, it parses the directories. So it creates new URLs until we get to the root of the actual domain, just in case there's an open directory. Because what I was finding is I might find an open directory at, let's say we have evil.com/path1, path2, path3, path4. Path 4 might be open, path 3 might not, but then path 2 is. So parse all of that into distinct URLs, and then that's just the foundation. That's just the basis. And then as it finds open directories, those get added to the queue, and it continues to crawl. So turn into a modular framework. We have the input modules, which give us the ability then to pull URLs from places like the URL house. Those go into a queue before the engine kicks off. The engine then handles the orchestration. It does some multiprocessing based off of the cores on the system to try to speed up the crawling process, because it can be very time consuming and lengthy, establishing connections, waiting for responses, things like that. Configuration file, of course, to help trying to tweak how it's going to perform. We then have processing modules. So every Right now, we only track HTTP 200 statuses. That's the most lucrative. Certainly there's some misconfiguration like fake 404s and stuff. Easy to change the engine to look at those responses. But right now, just status 200s. And then it gets the HTTP response body. And then that body can then be handed off to different processing modules. So we have a Yara module, we have a payload identification, just being, tell me the raw file type using things like libmagic. There's some others that you'll see if you go look at the GitHub before eventually there's a storage module. And then the storage module is just that, stored in MISP, stored into, I'm working on an Elasticsearch module right now, or there's an SQLite database, or there's just simply printing to the console. So there's a number of different ways in which we've defined for storage. There's also what I consider a run once mode, which is just that we generate a file, which is what we'll probably do today. Generate a file, we feed it a file, it parses the file. It can then optionally store the results in whatever mechanism you'd like. And that's it. The other mode is a service mode, in which then it's using the queuing system. And I believe right now we've got it limited to a MISP integration, but I'm working on getting the Elastic module integrated. And then it can just run, kind of constantly every few minutes, pulling from your input modules, putting into the queue, deduplicating hosts that you've already scanned, scanning those again, putting the content in to your storage location. So that's the nutshell there. To start with, then let's look at some different content. And maybe let's just take a few minutes here. I need to stand up and stretch. All right, I think we're close enough. So let's get to resumed here. I had this one of my first experiences teaching. I taught a night class for non-traditionals at the university. So it was like a 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And the first night I showed up ready to go, and I point out non-traditionals, so they're more adult-like, I guess you could say. And boy, I thought I was gonna just rocket the whole 3 hours, and about an hour and a half into it, I was out of content. So I was so embarrassed, and that class was so mad that they felt like I wasted their time. I never let that happen again. So now I always over prepare. In fact, I probably have enough content now that I'm sitting here to go for 5 or 6 hours. So I'm trying to kind of skip through and get to the good stuff. But that left a very profound spot in my mind in my professional development of trying to teach and educate. Okay, so we'll get started here. As I mentioned, so subcrawl. So probably one of the hardest things about this was just coming up with a name. I'm not very creative when it comes to that, but this came to me at the gym one day, and I thought, we're crawling subdirectories. We're trying to get underneath the initial layer of the internet, and we're doing crawling. So let's go with subcrawl. Unfortunately, there is a pub crawl, which comes up very popular in I think Ireland. So kind of competing with that too, but maybe the two are more closely related than I think. I'm not entirely sure. But here it is. It's all Python 3, all the code's available. And we think the documentation here in the README is good enough to get started. Certainly, there's a lot more things that we need to do with it, a lot more ideas, just better operational stuff. But in any case, you'll see here, if you haven't seen it before, I guess what you can get out of it. Why did I create it? Why did we create it? Again, I just wasn't finding any content, any frameworks out there that were doing exactly what I wanted. There were some really big frameworks that just seemed like too much. There was some other projects, but just whenever I would use them and look at the actual directories themselves, the open directories and the servers, it just wasn't mapping up the content. It wasn't getting everything that I was expecting it to grab. So that was really the main motivation. I didn't need to spend any more time writing Python 3. Before I got into cyber, I spent the first kind of 10, 12 years of my career writing software and doing a lot of enterprise development. I like developing, don't get me wrong. But this is a lot of code. So anyways, you can check out the project. It's again public on GitHub. Please feel free to open up issues and anything that you come across if you do find it useful, or I always love feedback as well as Patrick. To get started with the tool then, talking about phishing kits. And I find, a great place to find information about phishing is on the Fish Tank. So they have an API, as you might expect, data.fishtank.com, and this allows for just a full download of their database, which of course is a bit of a problem. I really want more of an incremental update. URLs submitted since the last time, and maybe there is a better API way of querying that. I've just been lazy and haven't figured that out. Because the subcrawl in service mode has a way to deduplicate the URLs, it handles a lot of that for me. But this is just sort of a raw thing. And again, to show the one-shot mode, because that allows us to see it in action. The service mode kind of runs in the background, and all you get to see is the data through the different interfaces. So we can download the fish tank content, again, just using a curl into a file here. Now, when we look at that JSON file, it's not just the URLs. It's going to be a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of information about that URL. And I don't need any of that in order to start the crawling. So in order to kind of reduce that information, and again, just a little bit of command line-ness. And of course, this can all be automated and streamlined. But just using JQ again to query just the URL. For whatever reasons, again, I guess call it laziness. I don't parse the double quotes around the URL in subcrawl, so it doesn't recognize those yet. I need to fix that. So that's why there is the sed command to just recognize the double quotes and remove them. And then you get your fishtank.urls, your file there. So big online valid.json, it's a big JSON file. It takes a moment, but now we have all of our URLs from the URL house. With these, this is a lot. I think there's probably, 9,037 different URLs. Some of them may be to the same host. Again, the subcrawl will handle the process of deduplicating those. But that can take a long time to scrape, especially again, depending on the mode that you're interested in. Let's say you're doing a pen test and you've just got a couple of hosts that you want to investigate, right? Dropping a few URLs in a file and investigating them is pretty quick and easy. In this case, maybe I don't want to scan all 9,037 at one time. I just want to do 500 at a time, whatever the case may be. Then what I might do is to split those. So, split maybe 500 at a time from the original URLs, which, as you can see here, I've already done. I have XAA, XAB, XAC. Those are just the output files after doing that split. So now I just have 500 URLs inside of each one of those files. Okay. Okay, not to bore you with all the code, but just to give you a little bit of background here, different configuration options. I think most of it is hopefully fairly self-explanatory, just in terms of looking at what the options are, how the crawler works, some of the behavior, where you can tell it to save content. So you find a PE file, it's already there on your scanner, it's in memory. You might as well write it to disk, or you can write it to disk. So a lot of different things here. Now, again, the documentation isn't quite there as to what everything does, but hopefully most of these are fairly self-explanatory. I've come up with a list of extensions to exclude. So again, it's a bit superficial in that as it's looking at the URLs, if it finds a URL with this extension, it ignores it. And things that I found very little value in scanning, MP3, MP4, .header files, .tpls, so templates, stubs, just anything. I'm adding them here. This way they don't get crawled. Some of the additional content that's being developed is the Elasticsearch. So that's part of that branch that will hopefully get around to getting committed as well. When you look at the kind of the structure, we have the processing modules. So here's an example of the payload processing. In order to add new modules, you just have to define, basically follow this template. And then when you run it, either in service mode or kind of one-shot mode from the command line, you just provide the name of the module that you want, either the processing or the storage. So here we have an initialization function that gets called just to make sure any dependencies are met. and then process itself. So every time a batch of URLs is done being scanned, you got the raw results there. So in this case, with the payload, we take that HTTP response body, that content, and just simply run it against libmagic to try to identify PE files, Office documents, zip files, anything that's of interest. Very similarly with the storage. So here's Elastic. Again, you've got to define a class following the template. There's an initialization. So for this one, a little bit more involved in that I want to make sure that we can connect to an Elastic cluster, that we can that the index is submitted. I need to get a template submitted. That's one of the last things that's preventing me from actually getting this into the main line. And then once each batch of URLs is done being scanned, now it gets handed that raw content and we can send it off to our Elastic cluster. So that's what's being done here. And that's pretty much it. Okay, now as far as the crawler, so here's our subcrawl. So defining our processing modules, payload and Yara, and then our storage modules. So I'm using Elastic. And then this is just to tell it to run in essentially that one-shot mode. The -F tells it to look for a file. This will go through. We get, while that's loading up here, we look at the config. We have different logging levels. So log level info. If you want to see a lot of output, you can turn it to debug. And then you have even less robust levels of logging, such as just critical and warning. Okay, so right now with just info, it tells you the modules that are loaded. It tells you how many hosts that it encountered inside of the input source, and then how many URLs that it's going to scrape. So how many URLs that it found plus those that it generated. And then from that point on, it just begins doing the scraping. And in info mode, you're only going to get status information. Well, every once in a while like this silly error message that we're not suppressing properly. But you're really only going to get output from the different payload or the different processing modules or the different storage modules. So now this makes it a little bit hard to do this live because now it depends on how quickly it can discover content. So while this is running, what we can do is we can take a look at the Elastic output here and just explore a few of these things. I'm not a Kibana visualization expert, so don't judge me. But this is what I'm trying to use these visualizations to get kind of insight into how the crawling. This is just simply a record of number of hosts, number of unique URLs scraped over time, just to get a high level overview of my activity. Here we have libmagic. So what is the majority of content that I'm discovering? And I filtered out basic things like empty responses and other information that I'm not interested in. You can see I've come across some hosts that have a lot of Excel. This is just stats: how many hosts, how many URLs, how many PE files, how many zips, how many protected web shells, and how many Office documents. And then we'll dig into those here in a moment. And then, of course, just trying to find a way to very quickly see the results of the scanning. You can, of course, here we have a result, right? So from the payload module, you can see that right now I've got some print statements in there so that you can see this. And this also gets dropped into the log file. And then eventually it gets stored into your storage module. But it found this, what appears to be a OneDrive phishing kit at the tradeswarehouse.com. Pretty sure I've already scanned this. So we could look at the different zips that I found, just sorted by chronological history here. Or we could, let's see here. Have that as a filter. No, let's do this. With the convention here, I guess maybe it's worth pointing out, I did try to follow the Elastic common schema so that there is more of a predictability to it. Request dot lock. I don't need that. I'm probably screwing this all up. Well, anyways, it's usually easier than the way I'm making it look in order to find that content. Maybe I've reset it. Well, anyways, it will eventually get logged because again, things are in a batch. It's just going to scan a number of URLs before it commits that to the storage mechanism. So it's not quite there. So this is a more immediate way of finding it. And if I want to, oh, did I just hit Control C? I think I did. Shoot. If I want to go explore that, I might. One second here, my Zoom bar is in the way. I might do something like, maybe use the Tor browser, or I've got a number of different hosts that that I connect through in order to explore. Operational security is an important thing, and so even though I'm working from home, I don't do any of this sort of investigation directly from home. Here you can see this is a great example of a open directory. And an open directory that I'm particularly interested in, again, if I'm looking to harvest actual kits, this is a kind of an interesting way to do that, because for this particular operator, they uploaded not only the fish, so there's the phishing kit. This one here looks like we got nothing, so they probably are doing some sort of a anti. Oh gosh, what would you call that? Well, they see I'm coming from Tor. They're looking for that, and they're trying to block anyone that's not potentially an actual victim. But they also uploaded and left the zip. So, you may be able to, depending on your comfort level and other factors, you may be able to download that. And now you have the actual entire contents of the zip. And these often contain, all of where the anti-analysis is, where are they trying to block visitors from, where is the exfil going to? A lot of these kits aren't anything that are really complex. And so there'll just be a script in there that as soon as a user submits their credentials, it fires an email off to whoever is trying to harvest that information. On occasion, you'll find that they have public admin panels that they didn't bother to protect those. So all of the information that's being stolen is just being listed right there. And you'll also maybe notice that there are other zips, maybe related, maybe not, but there are certainly other zips as well as other content. And doing this manually, this is where the challenge came in. Once I discovered a way to identify these in a consistent manner, I didn't want to have to do this manually every single time. And so trying to find a way to automate this is basically what subcrawl was there to do. And so you can see, if we go back, let's get rid of this feeble attempt to filter and just go back to the raw results. This is providing me that summary. So now I can see all of the zips that have been identified throughout my scanning, and that provides, again, just sort of a quick and easy way of looking at that. Okay, let's do this. Go back to the crawl. Okay, as you might expect, let's do Hyodo. URL House is also a great place to get this information, to get data from. So we can issue a curl command, or we could automate this as an input module, or again, however you want to find URLs and then ingest them or try to discover content. URL House, though, great. We can use the tag filter and search for things that are just Hyodo, Emotet, and then the same processing and parsing from there. So we'll drop those URLs into a subcrawl.urls file on the desktop. I can take a look at that just to maybe real quick give a sanity check. Those all look pretty good to me. There's no double quotes around the values, so that won't cause any issues with scanning. And much like you saw with the phishing kits, whoops, I got to go to the right directory. had a problem parsing one of the URLs. So if you look at the code, you'll see there's this big, ugly, regular expression that I credited to Stack Overflow that it needs some love, but it doesn't error out too much. Typically, these strange TLDs seems to be where the problem is. But here we go, 816 hosts, 1,704 URLs, and then it's just going to start scraping. And so now all of those URLs are being discovered and explored, and we may see some results here, we may not. So while that's chugging along, let's kind of set up the next thing. Here's a few more phishing kits. I don't typically share. I share these on Twitter. Generally, if I find something like this, I'll share it on Twitter. There really isn't a place that I'm aware of to upload those, and I generally, I put them on Fish Tank, but I'm already getting the URLs from Fish Tank. The kits themselves, I don't usually. I have quite a collection now, but I don't usually make those public just because I'm kind of on the fence on does it help or does it hurt? I'm not really sure. Here you can see an example if we were to take the time to dig into one of those kits. Of course, the code's all there, and that's sort of the interesting value in having the kit, because if we didn't find the kit, we just had the open directory, we just knew that there was a fish there. Oftentimes when you issue those requests to the server, you're just getting the interpreted results back. So you're getting the 404, you're getting the not authorized, you're getting the phishing page, but you can't really see what's going on there because you're just observing from that client side perspective. This was the example I mentioned earlier, in that this one had an open, unprotected admin panel. Fortunately, there was no real data there. At least it didn't look like it was all stuff like this. But not a good thing, right? Especially if it's not Netflix. Well, we probably have Netflix, but it's your organization, it's your bank, it's your financial institution, and it's all your customer data that's there instead. Web shells are another, I think, really interesting one. Web shells they're nothing new. They're certainly used in order to manage access to a compromised system, as well as you can certainly use them for a legitimate system, I suppose. Although I don't know why you'd use a web shell if it was your system. You'd probably just log into the system itself. But I started running across a lot of these web shells. Now, some of them are going to be open. And of course, again, it's kind of up to you and where you sit on morals, ethics, and legality of it. Some of them will definitely just be open. That means you click on a file.php and here you go. Now you're into being able to investigate everything on that server. Of course, the unique advantage that gives is now you can see everything. If there's proxy scripts, Emotet, for example, you get a request to just a folder, and it somehow determines how to return the content to you. Well, how is it doing that, and what is all the logic behind that? Well, now with an open web shell, you have the ability to do that. In other cases, you're going to find that they're password protected, and so in the screenshot here to the lower left, you can see this is a good example of a password protected web shell, and that all you get is the password prompt, right? Well, what can we do with that? Well, interestingly enough, I thought if we have the response, and if I take that response and I hash it, maybe that's a good enough indicator. And it turns out it is, it is, and that you can take the content and hash it. And I started finding these shells across a variety of different compromised servers. And so while you can't necessarily see the logic behind the shell or how the adversary is using it, it certainly can be another way to detect and look at the infrastructure that they're using in order to deliver their tools and their malware. So back to my results here. And this is PE files. We can come back to that in a moment. But these are web shells, and how I've determined these, you maybe saw that very briefly here, that there was an open web shell. That's through the Yara processing module. Now, I have to warn you that my Yara rule for open web shells sucks, and that it just gets it matches on a lot more content than it should. So this probably is not an open web shell. It's at the root of the domain. I really doubt that, or the root of the site. It probably has a form somewhere on there. So I need to tweak that. as I said, a lot of work needs to be done. But the protected web shells is a lot better. You'll see here, there's the hash of that response body. So here's basically the response of the password protected shell, all the same value, but it's only across this one host. So it's a little less interesting when we start finding this across, well, like here's the same hash over a different host, right? That's where it gets to be more interesting. That's where we can start to see the connection between those shells and the different hosts that have been compromised and are using those shells. So straight up SHA-256, there's no fuzzy hashing to it. And that's another way to track that. Now, if we take this URL and we go to the URL house, I'm guessing that URL probably won't be there, but this host probably is. Whoops. Got a little more than I bargained for. Okay, let's try that again. Nothing's there. Okay. Let's try this one. There we go. So that's an Emotet one. Does that mean they're related? I don't know. Seems like it to me. Somehow there is a relation there. This latter one, though, didn't have any results. So it hasn't been known to deliver, or it's been associated with any payload, at least not on the URL house. So that one to me is worthy of even just a moment's little exploration. Maybe, gosh darn it. Try that. Ah, sure enough. Right, we can see quite a bit more content is here. We've got some PHP files that just say things like hello. We've got directories that are, they appear to be just these HTML files. You are not logged in, right? I mean, definitely there's a little something more to explore here. I haven't looked at this content, so I can't say for sure exactly what I'm looking at without messing around a little bit. If I go back to subcrawl, this host, let's see if I can. Yeah, and my scrolly windows here to mess me up. So still trying to figure that out. The most user friendly. But what I want to add is this is the netlock. So add that as a keyword just to see the filter. Whatever. I give up early when it comes to that. But what I wanted to do, and I'll come back to it if we have time, is just to take that host and look at the content. Plus sign on the indicator. Okay. Yes, thank you. It's just to look at the content because it's already, the work of scraping that's already been done. If there are more shells, it would have found it. If there are Office docs, it would have found it. If there's PE files, it would have found it. And now I'd be able to just see, very quickly through the results here, even though I'm just butchering, trying to figure that out. I'd be able to see that here instead of having to go through and manually explore each one of those things. And so, again, just to kind of step back again, what's interesting about those shells is this sort of activity that we're just talking about. There is the same shell on two different hosts, and maybe there's a connection or correlation there. One was tagged with Emotet, the other one was not. And why is that? I don't know offhand. And then when we go to those hosts, how do we make sense of all of this content? And again, because subcrawl has gone through here and crawled all of it, if there's anything that I care about, I have it as a module, as a processing module, and now that's been categorized, it's been collected. And so I don't have to sit here and double click through things. Now, if I find that there is no PE files and there is no docs, then I might come and do a manual investigation like we're doing here and decide that there is something more. Maybe I do need to find, make some additional Yara rules, or maybe there's a different file type here that I'm missing. But that's left then for the manual investigation. The size, the different timestamps, those can also be helpful. That's not to say that they can't be modified, but certainly it is something that I generally look at. If we're looking at recent threats, if we're looking at, let's say these phishing kits, right? It looks like the zip was uploaded earlier this year. So they're a little old at this point in time. When we look at okay, so here's the original. Let's look at this one. This is the one that caught our eye. The zip was uploaded, it looks like earlier this year. When it's extracted, it looks like maybe it was one that was written a couple of years ago. So that doesn't mean that it's not effective at collecting credentials. But if this would have been uploaded 3 years ago, maybe it's something that's less interesting because it's just older data that's not being utilized anymore. It's just a server that's been left online for whatever reasons. Okay, so here you can see continuing to scrape away. This is actually where all of the documents are coming from. So you can see there's a site here that is finding these documents at the school facilitator old .xlsx. I think these are all legitimate things. So unfortunately, it's just adding a little bit of noise and a distortion to the content that I'm seeing, but not a really good way to filter those out. Anything with that's PHP. So there is a libmagic for PHP, and it identifies that. I also find raw PHP to be interesting, and in particular where I found these to be the most interesting. I don't actually have an example of this, but a lot of times when you find a compromised host, if they've run some sort of a scan on it, if it finds like a web shell or something, it will quarantine the file, but it'll only add a .suspected extension to it. So it neuters it in a way and that it's not going to be interpreted anymore by the server. But it's going to get a bad web shell .php .suspected. And so here, I guess this is probably an example very similar. It looks like it anyway, in that we have this login.php-old. Well, since they removed the .php or they modified it, the server isn't going to interpret that anymore. It might just return the raw PHP content. So if we look at that content, now we have the full PHP file that either we can look at the content or we can download it. And again, now it allows us to investigate, how do these shells work? Maybe there's a way to figure out the password. Not that we need to all become, vigilantes. Now this looks like it rendered it. So this isn't quite the example that I was hoping for. Although I don't know what manic dashboard is. This looks like it might be something related to this school. Can't really say for sure. But sometimes what they'll do is, if it was a .suspected or something that in any case, tells the server not to interpret the PHP, you might get the raw PHP. We could view the page source. I'm curious as to why the libmagic said that was a PHP file. But sometimes this just doesn't all work out the way that I hope, especially when doing things through Tor. I try not to use Tor for too much of my research, but for right now, it's pretty easy just to use it to look at a few hosts that we investigate from time to time. So anyways, these are the kind of things that typically catch my eye because they sort of fall out of the pattern of things that I am expecting. There is a web shell tracking script. And if you're interested in, we won't have time to get into all the details there, But Patrick discovered this when we were, kind of kicking around ideas as to how are all of these sites being compromised. And one of the ideas that we came up with was that maybe it's more of a supply chain thing. Maybe there are plugins in WordPress and themes in WordPress that are already backdoored. He came across this really strange bit of JavaScript that when we looked for evidence of that in GitHub, we found a lot of repositories, a lot of projects that contained it. So it almost seemed like what was happening is that folks, as they're setting up their websites, they're maybe grabbing plugins or themes or libraries from not the original source, not the authoritative source, but some clone or some fork, installing that, and then it's already kind of backdoored. We have a white paper and a full write-up about that from Virus Bulletin this fall, so just a couple months ago. So that would give you all of the details there as to what we found and what that looks like. So if you're interested in digging into a little bit more of that. Okay, so that's a bit of the web shell stuff. Proxy scripts, of course, those are out there. They're very commonly used. Proxy script just being a way to, like an Office doc is able to make a request out for a payload. It hits a server. The server then is a PHP script that then connects to additional kind of backend infrastructure to determine what to do and the payloads to deliver. So a lot of times those are very simple. They're very simple pass through, but it does reveal sort of a deeper level of the infrastructure if you're able to get your hands on those. I have an example. I did post those on GitHub. So these were some proxy scripts that was, oh no, I guess I have a bad link. Let's see. Malware infrastructure. Qbot. Here it is. So I'll have to update that. But you'll see the proxy scripts are all there, and all the artifacts are uploaded to this part of the GitHub. If you want to take a look at those and how those look, how they redirect htaccess files, and just sort of all of the artifacts that are there that come along with these proxy scripts. There is probably the more pertinent part of that particular script, just making an HTTP request to a dotted quad. These servers, again, they get closer to, I don't know, their real infrastructure. I mean, it's all real infrastructure, but these were the ones that the bad guys are probably logging into more regularly. Bad guys, I don't know if that's the right word, but adversaries, threat actors. C2 panels, also something that I'm finding less and less of, which I guess is I don't know, it's a little frustrating from a research perspective. But the panels are very commonly used for what I would say commodity malware in order to manage the infections, to manage the bots, to manage the data that's stolen. And you could think of it like a content management system, right? It's typically a PHP application. It's going to have a database, and the bots then will check into those panels. The panels will then collect any data that was sent back, as well as issue further commands. And so you log into these panels and you'll get a report. Like this is a Gomorrah bot that I found a little while ago. You'll get information about the victims and again, ways to manage that. So they're interesting in that they can help to unravel how those bots are communicating with the botnet, with these control panels, and that can help to unravel the data that's being stolen. It can also help to derive better, IDS signatures, because now you can see exactly what's going on between the two. So they're quite interesting for that. There's a number of panels that you'll come across. LokiBot, as old as that is a threat, that's probably one of the most prevalent that I find. Those actors seem to be kind of the sloppiest when it comes to setting up their hosts and leaving behind not only the open directories, but then the zips of their panels. Of course, a good chunk of these are already available on GitHub and other places that they've been leaked. And so that's probably another reason that they've become so prevalent. I don't have any, actually, I take that back. I do have some panels here because as you can see, with the zips, I'm not differentiating with the zips between panels and fish kits. It's just simply the zips that are found. No, more times than not, the name of the zip is a pretty good indication of the type of panel it is. But if not, it's again usually pretty easy to investigate. So here's need.zip, and this. Yeah, I saw. I think Veraback tweeted this weekend about just yesterday about a Gamora, and I haven't been keeping track of the version numbers, but he or she they posted about it, and then VX Underground grabbed it. So VX Underground, as a collective of researchers, they post a lot of the source code and panels. I'm just a little afraid to do it by myself. So this might work. Again, looking for this content, it is the foundation of discovering it is all based off of where do you get the URLs, and if those URLs are coming from behavior, malicious behavior or suspicious behavior, of course, the odds that you're going to find something interesting go up. If I get URLs from the URL house, odds I'm going to find something related to that malicious behavior goes up. Uniqueness maybe goes down, maybe because it's already on the URL house, somebody's already harvested the content. So. But any place you can get those URLs, and the closer that you can associate that with malicious activity, I think usually the more likely that it's going to turn out to be something good. This host doesn't seem to be responding, at least not through Tor. So it's possible that there's just, I don't know, issues with DNS or something. Let me switch over to this host here. There we go. So that worked a little bit better. So part of my research build out is I have a firewall that has some interfaces that are connected directly to VPNs. So that way everything on that subnet is routed through that VPN tunnel instead of going out from my house. This is one of those such systems. So here you can see that we have the directory as well as the zip file. So we can explore the directory a bit, at least to the point where we can't, and we get an actual response. Now, if you've looked at enough of these, like in this case, there's been sort of this rash of these need.zips showing up on a few different servers, and the structure here itself indicates that it's Lokibot. We'll eventually get to the point though where the panel code kind of takes over, and we'd have to, unless we knew what URLs to guess, we'd just want to grab the zip and take a look at that structure. And then again, in looking at the structure, there'll be some pretty solid tells that what we're looking at is Lokibot. When it comes to identifying that content, again, it can be a little bit challenging. Usually what I look for is, let me pause my screen share real quick and grab one. Okay, here's one. And resume my screen share. Okay, so this was a pony panel. I typically prefix these just so I don't forget. But panel new is the original name of the zip. And the structure is one way to do that. The different PHP files that they use, that might be one way to identify the panel type. Configurations can oftentimes be another. You might get actual, credentials there, but a lot of times the database, this one is not quite so straightforward, but a lot of times the database, they'll set up Pony database, or set up Lokibot database, or set up Gamora database. And so you'll see that, and that can be, an indication if patterns in the code or in the structure or in the PHP naming doesn't ring a bell, you don't recognize it. Of course, if I was really on top of things, I would create Yara rules, and that would help me with my identification, both as I'm discovering these with crawling, and then as I'm investigating these via the source code. But I have my list of things to do. I'm sure much like yours is just, it grows exponentially by the day. There might be other things, your admin.php might be, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's try to get this over here. Oh, there we go. Got it. There might be something in here that would really strongly indicate the type of panel, because these things tend to have, I don't know why, but just like any software, if the developers come up with what they're calling it because of how they're selling it, those tend to show up here. So seeing this pony DB object, this is a pretty good, to me, indication that what we're dealing with is a pony panel. We can set these up, of course. And the interesting thing about these, a lot of these, this sort of tier of panels is that they're self-sufficient, right? They contain the schema to install the database. You just have to do some basic configuration here to figure out where your SQL database is, and then go to the admin page or go to the setup page or go to the install page, and then it'll get it up and running. And now you have that panel available to do some investigation with. So those would be more of the panels. And again, I focus more on finding the archives of the panels. There certainly are ways to identify, just panels that are hosted live, and that would be another interesting part of it. But you're limited then to what's exposed on that server. Okay. As you can see here, I also, of course, interested in the different payloads. So finding executable files, finding Office documents. In this window here, I'm just interested in PE files. There's the libmagic. Most of that starts with PE32, and then it kind of varies from there, whether it's 32-bit, 64-bit, whether it's a .NET assembly. Even that alone can help you determine sort of big picture, what might I be dealing with? For example, Agent Tesla and Formbook, they use .NET. So seeing that these are .NET assemblies, that already sort of shifts my mind in that direction as to what might be hosted here. This one being a DLL. Oh, well, I don't know if this is the current trend with Emotet or even with Dridex, but for a while this year, Dridex was just delivering via DLLs. So that might shift my mind more in that direction. As we've been doing, always my first stop is going to the URL house. Because this is what I like about the URL house is there is a result, there are tags, very confident that it is an Emotet and that it's a part of their Epoch 5. So this can make sort of quick work of identifying these. Now, when it doesn't show up on the URL house, that's where there's a little bit more work. We'll do that here real briefly. There's also examples such as this. All right. And I will filter because that just works. But here through the course of crawling at this host, found 3 executables: vnn.exe, vnn1.exe, vnn2.exe. And what's interesting about this, when we look at results on the URL house, there's only one listed, right? And so through the process of discovering that that's an open directory, there were more payloads that were discovered there than are currently reported. And so these are Formbook, right? These are .NET assemblies. So likely these are also Formbook, maybe Agent Tesla. And I don't want to assume though, because it could be, and you do find from time to time that there is a host. Let's see if this is still live. I think this is the one that was live last night and now this morning is no longer. But there could be a mixed bag. There could actually be malware families of, payloads of different families that are there. And unfortunately, I didn't download them last night because I thought, oh, I'll do that today for the demo. So I think I've missed those payloads. Oh no, I take that back. I've got them because I have them. I crawled them. So I've written them to the disk, part of the crawling process. But that I don't think I have time to actually figure out where in the file system I archive. I know where I archived them, but it's a little convoluted, so I can't quite go grab them. I do have the payloads, so I can take a look at those later. But that would be part of the process then now is grabbing those payloads and trying to figure out what are they. Here's a different example. Let's see, which one is it? Not you. Right here. A successful GET request, successful, right? 200 status, returned an actual executable file. There's our executable file. And so we have this executable file that we can experiment with, we can investigate, we can analyze. There's a lot we can do with the network traffic as well. And unfortunately, I kind of ran us out of time. But let's see if I have the right. One of the few modifications I made to this Remnix distro is I installed Suricata, and I also, of course, have subcrawl here. And that's really about it. And then, of course, all the content that I've added. But we can use Suricata as an IDS in offline mode. So taking that sample here, downloading the PCAP. I'm not sure why, but I didn't get any Suricata alerts. So I must have something wrong in my configuration, or something must have stopped working over time. I don't tend to my Cuckoo instance nearly as much as I used to, but we can still grab the PCAP, and Suricata has an offline mode capability in which it'll process the PCAP and it'll generate all of the alerts, it'll generate all of the protocol data. And so we can take that data to do our investigation or take it even further. Generally, you'll see that. So if we go to a place like, any run, here it is. Right. The threats are IDS alerts, and then it's generating all of the data. But here you have the host and the network, right? With Suricata, we just have the network. Now it takes a little bit. Suricata has to initialize, the engine has to start, it has to load all the rules, and then it can generate these results. And in this mode, I always log everything to a temporary folder. And again, we're not going to have time to really get into all of it, but if we take a look at so one of the record types that Suricata will generate, JSON file. So the root structure of the JSON file are these event records. Event types will be all of the major events. You'll have file information events, so files identified on the network. You'll have HTTP, DNS, SMTP, TCP, UDP, all of that stuff. You can see that we have event records for files because we had a file that was downloaded. If we run this through JQ, just to make it look a little bit prettier, here is the HTTP request for our PE file. And we also have the SHA-256. So we got the file hash in real time as well. So that can be real easy then to take this information, different aspects of it, to try to do research, to go look on sandboxes, to go look in URL House, to go look in Alien Vault, to go look wherever we need to look, wherever you have access to for your data off of these different indicators to try to figure out what this is. A sandbox is, of course, a great place to take things, whether you are using a public sandbox, whether you have private access, something internal, you're running Cuckoo or Cape. Somebody asked if setting up Cuckoo was hard. After the 12th time, no. It took a little bit to figure out all the quirks and the nuances. But once you get used to that, no, it's not bad. And it's been super stable. Like I said, I've had Cuckoo running now for quite some time, because that's what I started with a couple of years ago, and I've had very little issues with it. It hasn't really been maintained though, and so I would encourage anyone who's thinking about setting it up to go look at the Cape forks, Cape v2. I'll post this in the chat there. This is probably, if I were starting from scratch again, this is where I would start. And this is where I'm going to go to eventually once I, maybe over the holidays here, I have a little time to set this up. So this is a great place to do that. If you take a look at my YouTube channel, I'm trying to jump right to my channel. Here we go. I do have a malware analysis playlist, and here's a couple videos on setting up on Cuckoo. So again, getting a little bit old, and not necessarily a place that I would suggest starting, but it still is a good sandbox. It still does. I still find use out of it and having it running. And Cape's going to be very similar in a lot of ways. So, a lot of lessons learned can be transitioned to that. So here is, yeah. And the great thing about Cuckoo Cape, you can run them from home, or you can run them internal in your own organizations. And now you have a private sandbox, as it were. Anyway, so yeah, so we have the ability to parse this information, to grab, maybe this is available. I find it in a sandbox somewhere, so I can search off of that. Maybe not. Maybe we have to run it in a sandbox. Interestingly enough, with this particular sample, even though pretty sure it's suspicious, right? It's a file that came from an Office doc. Oops, it was already in my browser. Where did I put that? Word launching PowerShell, launching console app. The summary, and I know I'm going just a tad long here. It doesn't have a social engineering document, but this document contains links that refer to other files. That's indicative of an embedded object. Again, in context here is quite abnormal. But yet when I put it in the sandbox, there was no suspicious. There's only some suspicious activity. There wasn't anything that immediately tagged it as malware family X. That could be a number of reasons. There could be some anti-analysis that the sandbox doesn't account for or can't. It could be that I just didn't simply let it run long enough. I only gave it 60 seconds of execution time. Maybe I should have given it 4 or 5. That can also lead to these sort of incomplete results. Even if you let it run, but again, that anti-analysis may trigger an abrupt termination, and you just don't get enough things to understand what's going on. And so then it's on to sort of, what do we do next? And you might have to look at more of an investigative approach to the file. So what type of file is it? It's a .NET assembly. So maybe I could use a tool like .peek or dnspy and open up the file and take a look at the structure. Maybe there's some Yara rules. I had these in my history. I don't know why they're not working. So I just grabbed, as an example, the Yara rules from Cape, because they're all available on their GitHub. And now we can scan against this application, and nothing matches. So that kind of leads to a dead end. Although maybe we'd have better, and we'll grow these. So these are just the default. Maybe these would grow over time. They of course they do work. I've got an unpacked Loki bot here, and you can see that matched on the Loki rule. A platform that I also find to be very helpful is Integer, and I don't work for them or have any tie-in at all. But they have a freemium platform or offering like many of the others, and that as an individual or as a small org, you can start using their platform. Let's just see if this works. I'm not logged in, so I don't know if it'll actually take my file. Yeah, I got to sign up. But what it does then is it has this method of taking apart the file and even doing some unpacking via dynamic analysis. And I believe looking at patterns of the code, whether that's disassembled or sequences of bytes, and comparing it to databases of known families, so that it looks at them sort of like these sequences, they call them genes, and then it can match them up and say, oh, well, the sample you uploaded is 87% match to Emotet, our Emotet database. And so we classify this as Emotet. And so you get, oftentimes I can get a nice result on what the family is. And I haven't had to dig real deep into it, right? And so these are all the sort of quick wins that are in my toolkit in order to discover content and then to try to identify that in a way that's sort of quick and expedient. Went a little bit long, so I am going to probably wrap it up here. Again, we could talk all day, and of course, in a longer session, we would certainly do that. I'm going to make sure I haven't missed any questions. So if there's anything I haven't covered or haven't answered, please, now is the time. Will the recording be made available later? Yes, you will get information about the recording to the email you registered on. Have I played with Assembly Line Sandbox? I have heard of it. I have not played with it yet. That is definitely on my list, that long list of things I have to do. This is another one of those tools that's on there. Looks very promising. Yeah, Cuckoo and Cape. I haven't done much with Cuckoo and Cape in the cloud. I do have a couple instances running in an ESXi environment, which I've had really good luck with, but I haven't tried to run it in anything like AWS or Azure. So I can't say for sure how that would work out, and even terms of use and all that stuff those providers have. So commercial tools products equivalent to subcrawl. That's a good question. I don't believe so. I didn't come across anything when I was out looking for this capability. I probably wouldn't have gone with a commercial solution because I'm like that, but there isn't anything that I can really think of. Maybe you're hinting at this as an opportunity to make it commercial, which I am thinking about. But no, I don't think so. Nothing that I can point you to. The more prevalent projects I came across, there was, I think brute something on GitHub that seems to be GitHub. Yeah, there's. Well, I can't remember, but there was a couple Dur Hunt. I think this is it. That seems to be quite mature. Yeah, this one. Find web directories without brute force that I looked at, and then there's a actual framework, a Python framework, which I can't think of the name now, but it's sort of a built-in web scanning engine. But it just was, I don't know, it felt way too much to do what I wanted to, and wasn't quite working the way that I wanted it to as I was starting to play with it. So, I started, like most projects like this, just a real simple Python script that just kept growing and growing. And I said, this is getting uglier and uglier. I need to make it a little bit more defined. So, okay, those are all those questions. So nothing in the Q&A. So last question from James about MobSec process. No, I haven't done that yet. I'd like to, and that's again one of those things. I do have a list. Seriously, I have a legal pad that's just full of these ideas, and I'd like to create a lot more videos on this, the OPSEC and all of the parts around it, because I think it's important and it's easy, especially for someone who's new. Because it took me getting into malware research and threat hunting. It took me a while to figure it out. Especially, I didn't have necessarily, an org that I was working for. I mean, I've been with Bromium for a while, but even with that, the team has been small at times, and it was a startup, so there were some lean times as well. It's just hard I think it's just found it hard to figure everything out over the years. So part of these things is to share at least bits and pieces of that. But no, I do have plans to do that, but I don't have anything out there that's really complete or I could point you to, unfortunately. Yeah, the VM. So let's do this right now. I'm going to pause my screen share. And give me 1 second here. Okay, so in the chat is a link to my Nextcloud. I will upload the VM and the slides to that share here later today. So just look for those later today, and I'll leave those up there for a week or so before I take them down. But yeah, the VM that I'm using here, there's a few things I need to take out of it. Again, it's basic Remnix. I just installed Suricata. It'll have subcrawl. Gosh, I might have installed Elastic on this. Hopefully I didn't do that. I don't think I did, but if I did, I'll make sure to leave there a README in that directory so that you know what you're getting into. But yeah, I'll get those uploaded, and then my email is earlier in this thread. I'm also, DMs are open on Twitter as well. So if I forget or I missed anything, then please feel free to reach out to me and just remind me. Do I do one-on-one training? It's actually another thing I've been thinking about, but I haven't done anything. I've tried to do a little bit of mentoring, just through the university, through some one-on-one, through a program. There's a battleship mentorship program, but it's just it's so time consuming. So yeah, again, feel free to reach out to me if you want to chat a little bit more about it. And maybe there's something we could figure out, but it's a bit challenging right now with the one-on-one just to find the time. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I guess to add a more formal wrap up, then thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate your time. I know it was a lot of me talking for 2 hours, but I wanted to get through a lot of content. The recording will be available, so if we went through anything a little too fast, hopefully you'll have a chance to go back and review that. Anything we talked about, we could have stopped and spent time on it, every part of the phase. And so my goal here was just to provide a bit of a broad introduction, as well as a little bit more insight into my approach. Again, many ways to shape this, where you get the data, how you analyze it, what you have access to. If I work at Google and I've got access to VirusTotal, well, that changes things for me. But as someone who doesn't work at Google and I don't have access to VirusTotal, this is what I use. All of this stuff is free and open source. And, I think the biggest part of it is just being able to contribute back to the community. And I think that's a great thing to be a part of anyway. So thank you all.